somebody who's primarily a computer designer, I think it's just a really exciting time because AI has opened up a whole bunch of new possibilities. Unless you've been sleeping under a rock, you see AI everywhere. In the internet, it's enabling all sorts of things that weren't before possible. Now when you talk to your computer, it actually interprets your words correctly, as opposed to maybe 10 or 15 years ago when manually designed speech systems were not nearly as accurate. It's able to recognize things in images, tailor the ads that you see to your personal needs. In medicine and biology, it's revolutionizing interpretation of medical images, but also mining of data to do more accurate diagnoses, being able to interpret genomes and relate them to diseases and phenotypes. Media and entertainment, it's basically doing content creation, captioning, all sorts of things. Security and defense, it's great at detecting anomalies. You train it on what's normal and it can find out what's abnormal. And one thing at NVIDIA we're very excited about is we think that we can make a dent of 1.3 million people who are killed on the highways every year by applying deep learning to autonomy, autonomous vehicles. Now, what's interesting about all of this technology, and it's a point that Terry made, is it's been enabled by hardware. When I was actually a graduate student in the 1980s, I studied newspaper with Jeff Hinton on Boltzmann machines. I took a course on hot field networks and experimented with a lot of the technology at the time. And in fact, all of the technologies that we use in modern neural networks, well, almost all, there's some nuances, but deep neural networks, convolutional neural networks, stochastic gradient descent, backpropagation, all existed in the 1980s. So you may ask, why did it take until 2012 when Alex Krasinski and Jeff Hinton at Toronto built AlexNet, which basically won the ImageNet competition? Why did it take that 30-year period for it to come to fruition? And the answer is that two things were needed. You had the algorithms, that was 1/3 of the recipe. You also needed lots of data. We had that in the early 2000s. There were large labeled data sets available. Both ImageNet, which my colleague Fei-Fei Li at Stanford curated, as well as Pascal data set, many others. But the real missing ingredient that came around in 2012 was computing engines fast enough to make it practical. With the fastest GPUs my company NVIDIA made at the time, it still took 2 weeks to train ImageNet, to train, I jumped ahead there with the wrong button, to train AlexNet, which is the network shown here, on the ImageNet data set. But basically, once that computer horsepower was available, it was the spark that ignited the AI revolution. From that point forward, it's been applied to images, to speech recognition, to sequence analysis of text, to reinforcement learning to control robotics and many other things. And it's really taken off, and it's, what we see today is the tip of the iceberg. AI is ultimately going to affect every aspect of how we work and live and play. It's really revolutionizing how we live. Now, what a lot of people don't appreciate is future progress in AI is gated by hardware. The AlexNet was great for ImageNet, but there was tremendous progress made over the next several years, going to VGGNet and GoogleNet and ResNet. And if you look at that progress, just the model complexity increased by a factor of 16 over this 3-year period. And actually what's not shown in this is that it would have been a factor of 160 if it weren't for efficiency improvements that came in the jump from VGGNet to GoogleNet, where they basically separated the convolutions in space from the convolutions across the channels. On speech recognition, in just 1 year, by going from Deep Speech 1 to Deep Speech 2, it took 10 times the compute horsepower to train the network. In fact, when I talk to people at many of these companies that use our GPUs to train networks, they tell us that we'd like to run bigger networks, train them on more data, but we can't. We're limited by how fast the computers are that you're able to deliver to us. And so we feel a huge responsibility to continue to deliver faster computers, because that's gating progress in AI. But there's a problem. Our two most recent Turing Award winners, my colleague John Hennessy at Stanford and Dave Patterson at Berkeley, in the latest edition of their textbook in computer architecture, published this figure, which basically shows that Moore's law is over. During a long period of time, we could count on getting more computer performance, largely because of improvements in semiconductor technology. Over a good 20-year period from the mid-1980s to the mid-2000s, computers got faster 50% per year. This was actually a combination of Moore's law, which gives us less expensive transistors, and what was called Dennard scaling, or by scaling the supply voltage as we scaled the feature sizes, we basically got a factor of 3 improvement in performance per watt in every generation of semiconductor technology. Today, both Dennard scaling and Moore's law are over. We no longer get a substantial improvement in performance per watt by going to a finer geometry technology. It's certainly not the 3x we used to get. Going, for example, from 12 nanometers to 7 nanometers, we're seeing about a 20% improvement in performance per watt. And the transistors are actually getting more expensive. The 7 nanometer transistors on a per transistor basis cost more than the 12 nanometer transistors. So the challenge for us is, without semiconductor technology helping us very much, how can we continue to deliver improvements in performance? Let me give you just one example of how at NVIDIA we feel the need for this. So the movie I'm about to show shows a number of networks we collectively call DriveNet that are used in NVIDIA's drive platform, or our self-driving car, which includes both hardware, the Xavier Drive Pegasus hardware platforms, but also a bunch of software and neural networks sitting on top of those platforms. We start out with a network that from visual can recognize both cars, just on the first one, but also free space. So we have 2 independent ways of saying where it's safe to drive. We can feed into our path planner that suggests the right path to follow. And then we put it all together. We're detecting objects, we're detecting free space, we're detecting lanes, and suggesting paths. But we do this not for one camera, but for 12 cameras around the car, as well as 3 LiDARs and several radars. So if you look at what the computational requirements are of this, we can start by looking at the network we use for this, which is actually a variant of ResNet. We use ResNet 50, a 50-layer network, which is actually simpler than the network that won the ImageNet competition in 2018. But it's sort of the workhorse network for a lot of our computer vision tasks. And for ImageNet-sized images, it takes about 8 billion operations to process a single image in ResNet, basically get out of detection or classification, or to find a path. But we're not processing 225 by 225 ImageNet images. Today, our self-driving car platform is doing HD images, 1920 by 1080, and shortly we'll be doing 4K images. But just even for the HD images, scaling it up, scaling this up to 30 frames per second is 230 gigaops, or a quarter of a teraop for these thumbnails. And for HD images at 30 frames per second, it's almost 10 teraops. To put this in perspective, that's comparable to the performance of the Earth simulator, which was the fastest computer in the world in 2004. So how do we do this? Well, today we do this with GPUs. And to give you an idea of what the state of the art is, about 2 years ago we introduced the Volta V100, which we actually consider kind of old technology today. But it is still the fastest tensor processing unit, the fastest computer specialized for deep learning. It's a huge die, 800 square millimeters with 21 billion transistors. What gives it its performance are what we call tensor cores. We take our general, very programmable parallel computer, the GPU, and we put into it special purpose hardware tailored for the inner loop of deep learning. That inner loop is a matrix multiply. And by putting in special hardware dedicated for deep learning, we can essentially amortize out the overhead of that programmability and get efficiency comparable to the best thing you could do if you build a chip only for deep learning, but retaining all the generality of a completely programmable platform. It also has very high memory bandwidth, because many deep learning tasks are memory bandwidth limited. And we put a very high bandwidth inter-GPU link on it, a technology we developed at NV Research called NVLink, that allows multiple GPUs to be gained together and look to the programmer as a single GPU, because they have essentially flat memory bandwidth. And today you can buy an NVIDIA DGX2, which is 16 of these V100s connected by a switch we built called NV Switch, which appears as a giant GPU with 16 times its performance, which is very important in training large networks. Since we announced Volta about 2 years ago, this past summer we announced Turing, which comes in a couple different flavors. It's actually the same chip operating at different power levels. If you have a lot of power, the RTX 8000, it has roughly the same FP16 performance as Volta for training. But what's much more important is that for inference, where we tend to use int8 or int4 or even int1, it has support for int8 and int4 and int1 at proportionally higher rates. So it has a half a petaflop which is kind of in for performance, which allows us to do very fast inference, very energy efficiently. And for many people who've told us they care more about hitting a particular power envelope, a 70-watt power envelope for certain data center servers, we basically take the same chip, we derate it, run it at